In 1896, Kafiristan, the land of the last pagans of Afghanistan, was conquered, and its people were converted to Islam. They had survived for thousands of years, and not even Timur had been able to get rid of them. But now, they had finally met their end, and their unique religion and culture went with them. Little did they know, a man who had visited their country only 13 years prior had recorded his journey, and his account provides one of the only glimpses into the lives of Afghanistan's final pagans. This is the story of William Watts McNair, and his journey to Kafiristan. William Watts McNair was born on September 13, 1849 in British India. He was commonly referred to as an Anglo-Indian, a British person born and raised in the country, although this word has now taken on a different meaning. Not much is known about McNair's early life. Although he did have 3 siblings, his father is never mentioned. His schooling was in India, and on top of a traditional British education, he would also learn the Urdu language common to the region. At the age of 18, he would join the Survey of India, an agency set up by the British East India Company to survey and map out the entire country and its surroundings. Having joined at such a young age, there is little doubt that McNair had a great passion for the subject, and he would spend the rest of his life in this career. Soon, he would be put to work. The next 12 years of his life were spent in the surveys of Rajputana and Mysore, under Major George Strahan and Sir Henry Ravenshaw Thulier. Here, he would gain valuable experience, and become thoroughly acquainted with the tools of his trade. The most important of these was the plane table, a level table used to measure the topography of its surroundings. In the meantime, trouble was brewing between the newly formed British Raj and the Emirate of Afghanistan. In 1878, the Second Anglo-Afghan War began, and McNair was enlisted the following year. He would serve in the Khyber column of the Afghan field force as their topographer. He was present for much of the fighting around Kabul, and was in the garrison during the famous siege of the Sherpur cantonment. But his duty was primarily in map-making, and he would chart much of the unknown country of Afghanistan, including Laghman, Logar, and Wardak around Kabul. He would also take some time to explore the Adrak-Badrak Pass, and is credited as the first European officer to have done so. After the war had ended, McNair was discharged, and he would join the survey of Kohat under Sir Thomas Holdich, mapping the empire's frontier from Kohat to Banu. Right on the border with Afghanistan, the laws of the Raj held little sway in this region, and its wild peoples were seen as a significant threat to the work. This proved, however, to be one of McNair's greatest strengths, and his remarkable amicability with the locals is noted by Major Holdich. McNair possessed the rare faculty of commanding the confidence of natives. He was not a especially good linguist, but he understood local idiosyncrasies. He could make 3 or 4 rupees as useful as 300 or 400 would be in the hands of a more clumsy negotiator. He would set up an old slipper with a 4 anna bit balanced on the toe as a handsome prize for the best spear at the game of nezabazi, or tent pegging, and it was a sight to see some of the wild border horsemen, with an 18-foot spear and the swoop of an eagle, speed down the course for the 4 anna reward. McNair would form a particularly close friendship with Mani Khan, a Pashtun chief who was said to have had a gigantic stature and who was covered with brutal scars. He was brought under the chief's protection, and the two would frequently cross the Afghan border to survey the lands beyond. British laws prohibited an officer from sleeping across the border, and so they would set off in the early morning to climb the region's enormous mountains and survey the surrounding landscape, returning well after dark. Major Holdich grew particularly fond of McNair, and would introduce him to a man he called the Syed. His true name is never given, and he was likely employed by the British government as a pundit. The pundits were a select group of native travelers who were tasked with secretly surveying the most dangerous regions. They were referred to only by their code names. McNair and the Syed would become fast friends, and he would inform McNair of his future plans, a journey to the land of Kafiristan. In this time, Kafiristan remained an enigma to the British. While its surroundings had already been more or less documented, this region alone was left blank on their maps. So far, they had only heard a few stories from their neighbors, who viewed the Kafirs as a race much different to themselves. Their name, Kafirs, a Muslim word for heretics, comes about because instead of following Islam, they were said to instead worship idols, particularly those of their ancestors. Many attempts had already been made to convert them, including by Mahmud of Ghazni and Timur, but these attempts had all been repulsed. Rather than resembling their neighbors, they were said to appear almost European, with even blue eyes and blonde hair appearing on occasion. They were famed as a warlike people, and no young man was allowed to marry until he had taken the life of a Muslim. Not wanting the Kafirs to come into contact with Europeans, the surrounding Muslims had thus far kept the region thoroughly isolated to foreign travelers. The Sayyid had plans to change this, and invited McNair to join in his scheme. They would accompany 2 Muslim traders who made yearly trips to Chitral. From there they could cross the border into Kafiristan. Of course, if it became known that a European was coming along, there was little doubt that the journey would be met with great hostility, and so McNair would need to adopt a disguise. He would adopt the moniker of Mir Mohammed, a tabib or local doctor. This disguise could only be pulled off with an incredible understanding of local habits, as well as a decent knowledge of their medicine. With the plan now finalized, McNair would request a year of leave from his work and begin his preparations. The trip would need to be kept secret not only from the locals, but from the British government itself, as they would certainly never authorize such a journey. When his leave was granted, McNair would travel to Nowshera, coming to the city at the beginning of April. Here, he put the final touches on his disguise. His hair was all shaved off, leaving only a full beard, and a solution of walnut juice was applied to his hands and face to darken his skin. His plane table would be crucial to survey the country, but this bulky tool would obviously give him away, and so an ingenious replacement was created. A large Urdu medicine book was hollowed out to store his tools, and the book itself would serve as the table. The first few pages were left intact, so that in case of emergency, he could show these to anyone who grew suspicious. On April 13th, 1883, McNair would join with the merchant caravan. They were around 40 men in total, along with 15 pack animals carrying binoculars, music boxes, glass beads, and various other goods intended for trade. Soon, they would depart, heading for the Malakand Pass. The Malakand Pass is well wooded with brushwood and stunted oak. Grass and a goodly supply of water from springs are procurable all through the year. The ascent is easy, and practicable for heavy baggage. The descent into the Swat Valley is not nearly so easy. Beasts of burden as well as foot passengers have to pick out their way. The Swat River is about 50 feet wide, from 3 to 4 deep, and flush with its banks. We crossed over in jalas, inflated skins, and our animals forded the stream with little or no difficulty. Almost due north of our crossing, and distant 8 miles, lay the village of Kotigram. We passed several topes, or Buddhist remains. These topes are very numerous, at least 20 were visible at one time, and some of great size and in a very good state of preservation, more than one quite as large as the famous tope of Manikyala. A little further up the valley, there were numerous excavated caves in the side of the hill, in one of which the traveler could take shelter during a passing shower. They climbed the mountain ahead, which McNair describes as being relatively easy. At the summit, he would begin a survey when he was suddenly met with 4 men carrying rifles. McNair quickly hid the tools up his sleeve and pretended to be searching for medicinal roots. The Sayyid would allay the men's suspicions, and soon they too were helping the doctor with his search. Coming down the mountain, the party arrived at the village of Kila Rabat, where the local Khan invited them for dinner. Long before this I had got quite used to eating with my fingers, but on this occasion I must admit I found it unpleasant diving the fingers into a richly made curry floating in grease, and having at the next mouthful to partake of honey and omelette. The banquet lasted for an hour or more, and I was beginning to feel uncomfortable sitting on the ground in the one position so peculiar to Eastern nations, when the hookah came to my rescue, and allowed a change in position. After crossing the Panchkora, they arrived at Shahzadgai, where they happened to encounter the Chief of Dir, which was at this time a semi-autonomous princely state. The chief had previously requested that the two traders bring a doctor, and was glad to let the disguised McNair examine him. The chief was found to have had a simple cough and cold, and his treatment went smoothly. After hearing of the doctor's visit, the townsfolk flocked to McNair for a diagnosis. I cannot say my stay was a pleasant one, for from early morn till dusk our hut was surrounded by patients, and inasmuch as the chief had recovered, it was considered a sufficient guarantee that, no matter what the ailment or disease might be, if only the tabib would prescribe, all would come right. Men with withered arms and legs, others totally blind, were expected to be cured, and no amount of persuasion would convince those who had brought such unfortunates that the case was a hopeless one. Soon, they would depart for Kumbar, where they received some disheartening news. A man called Rahat Shah Maya, an enemy of the two traders, had spread rumors that they were being accompanied by two Europeans in disguise. It is unclear whether he actually knew of McNair's presence, as he also implies that the Syed was a European, but regardless, this rumor was hard to ignore. Luckily, the chief of Deer came to their defense, verifying that he had asked for an Indian doctor, but suspicion still remained. They would reunite with the chief in the Barawal Pass, and together they traveled to his capital city. The fort of Deer is of stone, but in decay. It has an ancient aspect, but this applies still more to the village of Aryankot, which occupies the flat top of a low spur detached from the fort by a small stream. The spurs fall in perpendicular cliffs of some 20 feet in height, and in these are traces of numerous caves similar to those already spoken of, and some of which are still used as dwellings by the Balti people, who come to take service as porters between Deer and Chitral. The population of the fort and valley exceeds 6,000 souls. The party soon found that the road ahead was blanketed with snow, and they would need to trade in their animals for some Balti porters to continue. Having done so, they would enter the Lowari Pass, throughout which were cairns marking the graves of Muslims slain by Kafir bandits. The lone village in the pass, Ashreth, was inhabited by a group of Kafirs, although unlike their kindred they had converted to Islam. Despite this, they were said to be in league with their pagan relatives, informing them when travelers were approaching. Luckily, McNair's party was spared this gruesome fate, and they were able to safely traverse the pass. Fortunately, the ascent was easy and gradual. The descent is steeper, and in parts very trying. We had to cross and recross the frozen stream several times, owing to the sides of the hill rising almost perpendicularly from its base. To add to our difficulties, we had to pick our way over deep snow, not only over branches, but tolerably large-sized trunks of trees that had been uprooted. I was told that during the winter months a regular hurricane blows up this valley, carrying everything before it. Late one evening, they finally reached Chitral. Like Deer, it was a princely state, and they would meet with its chief Aman-ul-Mulk the following morning. As his cooperation would be required to enter Kafiristan, McNair would inform the chief of his true identity. Aman-ul-Mulk replied that he was a great friend to the British, and would allow McNair to do whatever he pleased. However, he insisted that as McNair's friends were not familiar with the area, he should leave them behind and take one of the chief's own guides with him instead. In addition, he informed McNair that the passes to Kafiristan were currently closed due to heavy snowfall, and he should wait until some Kafirs arrived in the city to take him. McNair would reluctantly agree to these terms, and would visit the Dura Pass while he waited. Although not fully traversing it, he would nevertheless learn that it was the easiest of all routes going north from Chitral, information that would be of great interest to the government. In addition, he took some time to observe the practices of the locals. In particular, he notes a number of artificial ponds surrounded by a short stone wall. About a third of the pond was covered by a mesh of willow branches. Apparently, these were constructed to hunt for migratory geese in the fall. A man would hide behind the wall until they had landed in the pond, then scare them towards the mesh, catching hundreds daily, a method adopted from the Kafirs. After returning to Chitral, McNair was delighted to learn that a group of Kafirs had already arrived. Unfortunately, they started with a rather large misunderstanding, as the Kafirs had previously met with a Christian missionary who informed them that the British government intended to come to terms. They believed that McNair must be their envoy, and that Aman-ul-Mulk had stolen the money and weapons he had brought for them. When this matter was finally cleared up, they then requested his help in defeating their rival tribe, and when this was refused, the Kafirs stormed out in anger. A few hours later they would return, and agree to bring McNair along as they wanted a doctor to treat an elderly relative. With Aman-ul-Mulk's insistence, McNair would set off without his companions towards Kafiristan. The group would travel through the Kalash Valley, home to the Kalash Kafirs. While McNair considered them to be a somewhat corrupted example, paying a yearly tribute to Chitral, they were nevertheless genuine Kafirs, and are one of the only tribes to still preserve their religious beliefs to this day. Reaching the end of the valley, they would rest for the evening before waking at midnight to climb the towering peak of the Kotal ahead. Progress was slow, only about 1,000 feet every hour, and they reached the summit just as the sun was coming up. The view on the Kotal as the sun was rising was a sight never to be forgotten. Near and around us the hills clad in white with different tinges of red showing, and clouds rising in fantastic shapes, and disclosing to view the blue and purple of the distant and lower ranges. From here they would begin their descent. As the snow was beginning to melt under the morning sun, they would use a sort of tobogganing system, sitting down and leaning back to slide down the mountain, quickly reaching its base. They were now in the Lutdev Valley, and McNair had finally reached Kafiristan. Kafiristan embraces an area of 5,000 square miles, bounded on the north by the Hindu Kush Mountains, and on the south by the Kunar Range. Their country is picturesque, densely wooded, and wild in the extreme, the men of fine appearance, with sharp Aryan features and keen, penetrating eyes. Blue eyes are not uncommon but do occur, but brown eyes and light hair, even to a golden hue, in combination are not at all uncommon. The general complexion varies to two extremes, that of extreme fairness, pink rather than blonde, and the other of bronze, quite as dark as the ordinary Punjabi. They are, as is always the case with hill tribes, short of stature, daring to a fault, but lazy, leaving all the agricultural work to their womankind, and spending their days, when not at war, principally in hunting. They are passionately fond of dancing, in which both sexes join, scarcely letting an evening pass without indulging in it around a blazing fire. The dancing, which I on several occasions witnessed, was invariably begun by a single female performer appearing on the scene, and after going through a few graceful movements, a shrill whistle given by one of the men is the signal for a change. Each couple, holding a stick between them, their feet firmly planted on the ground and close together, spin round at a great pace, first from right to left, and then from left to right. None objected to my taking part in this performance, but for the indulgence, I had to pay as forfeit several strings of beads and shells, which I presented to those of the fairer sex only. The temples are square chambers of timber, with doorways carved and colored. Inside there are set several stones, apparently boulders from the riverbed, but no images were seen, except those connected with funeral rites, which were temporarily set up in the temples. The use of these temples seemed to be chiefly in connection with funeral rites. The coffins were carried there, and sacrifice performed before the bodies were carried off to the place of eventual deposit. The dead are not buried, but put into coffins and deposited, either in an unfrequented spot on a hillside, or carried to a sort of cemetery and there left, the coffins being in neither case interred. I visited one of these cemeteries, and saw over 100 coffins in different stages of decay. Resting against the heads of some of these, I noticed carved wooden figures of both sexes, and was told that this was an honor conferred only on persons of rank and note. As regards their religion, one supreme being, Imbra, is universally acknowledged. Priests preside at their temples, in which stones are set up, but to neither priests nor idols is undue reverence paid. Unforeseen occurrences are attributed to evil spirits, in whose existence they firmly believe, giving no credit to a spirit for good. Their wealth is reckoned by the number of heads of cattle they possess. There are 18 chiefs in all. Selection is made for deeds of bravery. Some allowance is also made for hereditary descent. Wheat is their staple food, and with the juice of the grape they make a kind of bread, which is eaten toasted, and is not then unlike a Christmas plum pudding. Unfortunately, McNair's glimpse of Kafiristan would last for just a few days. He received an urgent letter from Aman ul Mulk, informing him that his companions were in trouble. When he returned, McNair found that this was a lie, and that Rahat Shah, the man who had spread the rumors about European spies, had come all the way to Chitral, and had been spreading rumors to the chief in McNair's absence. Aman ul Mulk claimed that he had called McNair back because of some skirmish in the region, but McNair held little doubt that this was merely an excuse, and that the chief had no intention of allowing his journey to continue. Despondent, McNair had no other choice than to return home. After he had done so, McNair received a severe reprimand from the government for his actions. McNair seems to have been mostly unconcerned, having no real complaints about this poor treatment, despite the fact that his mission report had no doubt provided them with extremely valuable information. One official, at least, welcomed him back with open arms, Sir Charles MacGregor, the Quartermaster General of India. Many believed that he was the one who had encouraged McNair to make this journey, or that at the very least he had been told about it before McNair's departure. As McNair's leave was still ongoing, he would take the chance to visit England, where the Royal Geographic Society gave him his sorely lacking accolades. After presenting his findings, he was made a guest of honor at their dinner, and was granted the Murchison Award, being judged to have been the man who contributed most to the field of geography that year. This did not mean, however, that he was totally without criticism, as some did find it rather unfortunate that he had not brought along a linguistics expert to better understand the region's vocabulary. Eventually, McNair would return to India and resume his work. With the government's opinion having been made clear, he could expect no grand promotion, and would remain a simple surveyor. He was now assigned to the region between Dera Ghazi Khan and Quetta, which he would spend the rest of his life mapping out. Little is known about McNair's activities in these final few years. Besides his work, his only other passion was for cricket, at which he was no less skilled than at surveying, and he was a sought-after captain whenever matches were held. He would never marry, although he is said to have frequented the bedrooms of local widows. In the summer of 1888, while attempting to tame a friend's horse, it would rear up and fall on top of him. Under the care of his mother and sister, McNair was confined to his bed for a month. He eventually returned to his work, but his wounds had still not fully recovered, and while spending the winter working under adverse conditions, many of his pains would return. For the past fortnight I have had a rough time of it with rain, wind, and haze. Since yesterday there has been a change for the better, so now I hope to push along with my observations. Just at present I am in a low valley, and consequently the heat is somewhat trying, but in another fortnight I expect I shall be complaining of it being a little bit too cold, at an elevation of 10,000 and odd. I have little or no news to give, as it is now some time since I saw a pale face, but somehow or other, solitude has its charms for me. In the spring, McNair applied for 3 months of leave for recovery. His request was only granted in July. During this long wait he fell ill, and could only depart in early August. Once he reached his family home at Mussoorie, he would visit a doctor, who diagnosed him with typhoid fever. On the 13th of August, 1889, William Watts McNair passed away. His funeral was attended by his grieving family, and by his many native friends who were no less distressed. While he remained a simple surveyor, McNair's journey had not gone without notice, and the local papers could not help but comment on his tragic end. McNair belonged to a department which is not great in distinctions and decorations, and he belonged to what, by grace of official courtesy, is called the subordinate branch. Out of it he never rose, though had he lived on the Russian side of the border, his career might well have brought him high military rank and decorations in strings across his uniform. They say that decorations are cheap there. Yet it should be remembered that zeal, industry, enterprise, and patriotism are cheap too, if they are to be won by them. Perhaps we manage better. The good old copybook maxim, "Virtue is its own reward," must be McNair's epitaph, whilst we cannot help feeling that India could have better spared many a bigger man. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, and subscribe to see my future content. If you found it interesting, You may also enjoy my video on the con man who discovered Troy, Heinrich Schliemann. As always, thanks for watching.